They ignored you, they criticized you, they failed you, and something inside you broke. But what if I told you that none of that has real power over you? That the pain you feel doesn't come from the world, but from the way you interpret it? What if the wound isn't in what happened, but in how you chose to see it? This is the Stoic truth. What hurts us is not the events, but our judgments about them. Said Epictetus, if you can understand this not just with your mind, but with your soul, nothing will be able to hurt you. What we call suffering is nothing more than resistance to the inevitable, attachment to what we cannot control. Most people spend their entire lives trying to avoid pain. They run from loss as if it were divine punishment. They strive to stay away from criticism as if every outside opinion were an irreversible verdict about their worth. They fear rejection as they fear death, as if being excluded from a social circle were confirmation that they don't deserve to be loved. They suffer for what they cannot control: the weather, the economy, the decisions of others, illness, the passing of time, as if their well-being were chained to the whims of the outside world. But the Stoics knew something the rest of the world has forgotten, something so simple and profound that, when spoken aloud, almost sounds too obvious, and yet almost no one lives it. They knew that it is not the world that hurts us, not people, not failures, not tragedies. It is not the death of a loved one that destroys us. It is not losing a job, nor being left alone, nor aging. What truly wounds us is what we think about those things, our interpretation, our evaluation, our mind. And this, far from being an abstract idea, is a key, a door, a weapon, an opportunity. Because if the pain is not in the world but in my mind, then I have power over it. Then I can learn not to suffer for the inevitable. I can transform the way I see things, and in doing so, transform my experience of life itself. The difference between a wise man and a common man is not in the circumstances they face, but in how they respond to them. The wise man is not wise because his life is easier. He is wise because he has learned to relate to pain, uncertainty, fear, and loss in a different way. He has learned that what happens outside of him, the weather, words, events, cannot touch his inner self unless he gives it permission. Epictetus is the living example of this. He is not a mythical figure nor a legendary hero. He was a real man, born a slave in the Roman Empire. His body was broken, a leg deformed by the abuse of his master. He lacked everything the world considers valuable: no property, no political power, no family, not even freedom, and yet he was freer than many emperors, because Epictetus understood the Stoic truth with fierce clarity, that the judgment you make about what happens is more powerful than what happens itself. We are not disturbed by things, but by the opinions we have about them, he taught. And in that seemingly simple phrase hides a silent revolution, a balm of existential transformation. Because if what hurts me is not what happens, but what I think about what happens, then I have the power, then the control is mine, not over the world, not over others, but over myself. And that is enough. That is freedom. Think about it. No one can guarantee that you won't lose someone you love. No one can promise you won't fail, won't age, won't face pain. But you can learn to relate to those things in a different way. You can train your mind, like a warrior trains his body. You can forge within yourself an inviolable space where no misfortune can enter without your consent. That is what the Stoics cultivated: a mind that does not break before adversity, a heart that does not shrink before injustice, a will that does not depend on applause or success or recognition, because all of that, applause, success, recognition, are external things, and as Marcus Aurelius would say, nothing external can touch the soul. This is not an invitation to cold indifference or insensitivity. It is not about stopping loving, or dreaming, or fighting. It is about loving without clinging, dreaming without depending, fighting without identifying with the result, because the only thing truly yours, the only thing no one can take from you, is your ability to choose how to respond, to choose what happens means to you. Imagine that. Imagine being able to look loss in the eyes, and though it hurts, not be destroyed inside. Imagine receiving an unfair criticism and not losing your peace. Imagine being rejected and still knowing who you are. Imagine that tragedy visits you, and instead of being swept away by it, you walk through it with dignity, not because you no longer feel, but because you have stopped being a slave to your emotions. Epictetus said that no man is free unless he masters himself, and he was right. True slavery is not physical, it is mental, it is emotional. It is living chained to the judgments of others, to your own fears, to desires you cannot fulfill. It is reacting like a puppet to every blow of fate. It is letting the world decide for you how you should feel, how you should live. But you can choose something else. You can choose to cultivate inner discipline. You can train yourself to distinguish what is in your hands from what is not. You can build a solid character that does not collapse when the wind changes. You can learn to see each challenge as an opportunity to grow, each obstacle as a teacher, each pain as a fire that, instead of consuming you, purifies you. Because if what wounds you is what you think, then you can learn to think differently. And if you can think differently, then you can live differently, a life with less fear, with more clarity, with more power. Not power over others, nor over fate, but over yourself. And that, according to the Stoics, is the only power that matters in a society like ours, where appearance matters more than essence, where one word can lift you to the heavens and another destroy you completely. This idea seems almost heretical. How can one live without depending on approval? How can one not react to offense, insult, mockery? How can one not sink when ignored, rejected, forgotten? We've been taught to measure our worth by the eyes of others, to tie our emotions to what others think of us, to beg for crumbs of validation as if our existence depended on them. And yet, the Stoics were revolutionary precisely because they dared to challenge that slavery, because they said, without trembling, that the human soul does not have to crawl behind the whims of the world, that there is an invisible yet inviolable boundary between what happens and how we respond, that true freedom, not the rhetoric of speeches, but the one that is felt in the center of the chest, when everything collapses, lies in separating the external from the internal. The external, what happens outside of you, the decisions you didn't make, the words others choose, the weather that changes without asking you, the fortune that comes or goes, the illnesses that appear, the love someone decides to give you one day and take away the next. All that is not yours. It never was, and pretending otherwise is a constant source of anguish. The internal, on the other hand, does belong to you, your thoughts, your attitude, your judgments, your will, your purpose, your way of interpreting what happens. That is your kingdom, your sphere, your empire. No one can enter there without your consent. No one can force you to think in a certain way. No one can take away your dignity unless you hand it over. This is the central thesis of Stoicism, that you are sovereign of your inner world, that no matter what happens outside, you can learn to guard your mind as one guards a temple, with respect, with discipline, with firmness. And if you achieve that, if you become the guardian of your inner world, then you will live invulnerable, not invulnerable to physical pain, to loss, to fear, to failure. You will still feel all that because you are human, but invulnerable to unnecessary tearing, to despair, to that form of collapse that is born not from the event itself, but from the meaning you give it. You will live invulnerable, even if the world is burning around you, even if systems collapse, even if chaos invades society, even if injustice seems to reign, because you will have conquered something that nothing and no one can touch. Let us think for a moment of Marcus Aurelius, not as a bronze statue in a square, but as a man of flesh and blood, emperor of Rome, the most powerful figure of the known world. He could give orders that reshaped history, decide the life or death of thousands with a single signature, redraw borders, appoint consuls, unleash wars, govern empires. And yet, in his most intimate moments, when the noise of power faded and night fell over the palace, he wrote in his journal reflections that leave us breathless for their humility, for their clarity. There, in those pages he never meant to publish, he reminded himself, like someone who wants to stay awake, that all of that is smoke, illusion, that honors, riches, political power, fame, are nothing but fragile props on the stage of life, that none of it is truly his, that, like all men, he too will die, that everything which today seems urgent and grand will tomorrow be dust. You have power over your mind, not outside events. He wrote, realize this, and you will find strength. And in that brief phrase lies the seed of a personal revolution. Because Marcus Aurelius understood that his only true dominion was over how he thought, how he felt, how he acted in the face of what he could not control. He realized that he could be emperor of the world and still be a slave to his passions, or he could renounce external rule and reign over himself, while his children died young, one after another, with neither medicine nor power able to save them, while he was betrayed by his closest generals, by men in whom he had placed his trust, while plagues ravaged entire cities, and the empire he ruled seemed to tremble beneath his feet. Marcus Aurelius did not break, not because he didn't suffer, not because he was made of stone, but because his center wasn't in the throne. It was within. He had built, stone by stone, a sacred space inside himself that neither tragedy nor glory could profane. That is the invitation of Stoicism, not to a life without emotions, but to a life in which you are not dragged by them like a leaf in the storm, a life in which you can look at pain, loss, criticism, betrayal, and say, "This is not mine. It does not belong to me. What does belong to me is how I choose to respond." In an age where everything is designed to provoke you, to manipulate your emotions, to make you react without thinking, from news headlines to social media algorithms, Stoicism is not just useful, it is urgent. Because if you don't define your own center, someone else will do it for you, and you'll live like a puppet, dependent on what others say, feel, or do. Marcus Aurelius, from the top of the world, understood that true power was not ruling territories, but ruling himself, and you, from wherever you are, can understand this too. You don't need to be an emperor. You just need to remember that you have a space within you that no one can invade. Today we live in a world obsessed with external control. Everything around us, social media, advertising, success metrics, pushes us to look outward, to measure our worth in numbers, in followers, in visible achievements. We believe we are someone only if we have a brilliant career, a perfect body, an ideal partner, a packed schedule. We live tethered to the gaze of others, begging for approval with every photo, every comment, every decision. And the more we depend on that external mirror, the more fragile we become, because we don't control that gaze. We don't decide how we're perceived, nor when the applause will stop, nor what criteria will be used tomorrow to evaluate us. And so, even if we have everything, we feel empty. Even if we seemingly control everything, we live in constant anxiety. There's something deep inside us that says nothing is truly ours, that a word, a news story, a gesture is enough for everything to collapse. And that feeling of being at the mercy of uncontrollable forces is what fuels modern fear. The fear of not being enough, of losing it all, of having no value unless someone is watching. But the Stoics, more than 2,000 years ago, already knew what we are only beginning to sense, that as long as you try to control what is outside of you, you will live as a slave. They offer you a lifeline, a way out, a path to stop drowning in this sea of uncertainty. And it's not a magic formula, nor an empty mantra, nor a promise of instant success. It's a hard truth, but a liberating one. Do not fight to control the uncontrollable. Fight to master the only thing that truly belongs to you, your mind. That is the core of Stoicism. It's not about renouncing the world, but about putting it in its proper place, about remembering that the external, fame, money, relationships, even your own body, can be taken from you at any moment. But there is something that can remain firm if you cultivate it, your way of thinking, of interpreting, of responding. Your mind is the only territory where you can exercise absolute dominion, and that dominion, though invisible, changes everything. That is the truth that transforms the soul, because the moment you stop trying to control what is beyond your reach, you feel something rarely felt today: rest, true rest, rest in the midst of chaos. Not because everything is fine outside, but because there is clarity inside. And when there is clarity, there is strength, because you know what depends on you and what doesn't. And you stop wasting yourself in battles you were never meant to win. That's what allows you to live without anything truly wounding you. Not because you become insensitive, not because you deny pain, but because you stop handing over your power to everything that lies beyond your grasp. And you reclaim it, not with aggression, but with acceptance, not with resignation, but with firmness, because when you accept what you cannot change, you stop fighting reality, and that is where freedom begins, of course. This doesn't mean you won't feel pain. Stoicism is not emotional anesthesia. It is not coldness nor repression. It is clarity. It is inner order. It will hurt when you lose someone you love. It will hurt when your life is torn in two and you don't know how to go on. It will hurt when you face failure, abandonment, illness, because that is what it means. To be human, pain is the price of awareness, of connection, of love. But the Stoics made a fundamental distinction between pain and suffering, and that distinction can save you. Pain is inevitable. We all feel it, no matter how wise you are, how strong, how prepared. It will hurt. But suffering is something else. Suffering is what happens when, in the face of pain, you react by saying, "This shouldn't be happening." It is the mental resistance to reality. It is that internal war against what already is, against what cannot be undone. And that war is optional. You can choose not to fight it. You can instead look pain in the eyes and say, "I didn't choose this, but it is here. I accept it," not with passive resignation, but with the strength of one who knows that not everything can be controlled, but everything can be faced. That radical, brave, lucid acceptance does not eliminate pain, but it cleanses it of the poison of suffering. It turns it into a teacher, not an executioner. And so, though it hurts, it doesn't break you, because your integrity is not at stake, because your dignity remains intact. Accepting what you cannot change is not weakness. It is maturity. It is wisdom. It is the understanding that you are not here to control the universe, but to live with nobility within it, and to act upon what you can change. Your decisions, your thoughts, your response to adversity, that does depend on you. And there, in that focused action, true power begins. That's why the Stoics were not fatalistic, nor cynical. They were profoundly active, but they acted from a place of balance, not desperation. From clarity, not fear. They knew the storm is inevitable, but they also knew one can be the anchor, one can be the lighthouse, one can be the sailor who, though he cannot control the sea, knows how to navigate it. Cicero, that great Roman orator who lived through civil wars, political betrayals, and the slow collapse of the Republic, understood something that many still fail to grasp. In his letters, written with the urgency of someone who knows everything can be lost in an instant, he spoke with respect and admiration for the Stoic ideal. He said the wise man is not a marble statue, untouched by emotion, cold toward the world. No, the wise man feels. He feels sorrow when a loved one dies, fear in the face of danger, uncertainty in the face of the unknown, pain in the face of loss. But there is a fundamental difference. The wise man is not dominated by what he feels. He can experience an emotion without that emotion hijacking his judgment. He can feel fear and still act with courage. He can be sad and still do what is right. He can be wounded by life and still never become a victim, because the wise man has made a distinction that few make. He has separated what is in his power from what is not. And that division, though it may seem small, almost conceptual, almost invisible, is what makes him truly free. Freedom is not doing whatever you want at every moment. That's an illusion, because there will always be limits. There will always be obstacles. There will always be things beyond your control. Real freedom, the kind you feel in your bones, is internal. It is the ability to govern yourself even when everything else is out of control. It is looking at a painful situation and not responding with despair, but with clarity, with firmness, with purpose. Cicero, who lived in turbulent times surrounded by ambition and betrayal, understood that this capacity for judgment, this inner filter, is what defines the human being. Because everything that comes from the outside world, everything that hits your life, can only hurt you if you let it in without reflection. But if that stimulus, that word, that misfortune, that setback, passes first through your judgment, then it no longer has the same power. If your judgment is calm, strong, just as Cicero said, then there is no external force that can destroy you from within. And this is not theory. It is not armchair philosophy. It is something that is tested when the darkness comes, when life takes something dear from you, when the plans you made so carefully fall apart, when people you trusted let you down, when, simply, The world is not what you thought it would be. In the hardest moments of my life, when everything seemed to collapse, when fear tightened my chest, when sadness became a constant presence, when the future was a dark unknown, I returned again and again to these words of Epictetus. When something happens to you, the only thing you can control is your attitude toward it. And that is enough. At first, I confess, they seemed beautiful but unreachable. Wise words, yes, but at first, they felt written from an impossible height, as if spoken from the summit of a mountain I could never climb. How can you not be swept away by anguish when your heart is broken? How can you remain serene when you lose everything you worked for? How can you not respond with anger when you're betrayed? But time and practice, because this is something you train like a muscle, taught me something fundamental, that every difficult moment was not a curse, but an opportunity, an invitation to apply, not just to understand, to live, not just to read. When someone betrays you, what can you do? You can't change the past. You can't erase what was done. You can't force them to ask for forgiveness. You can't guarantee it won't happen again. So what's left? Your response is left. You can cling to anger and let it rot you from the inside. Or you can look the betrayal in the face without denying it, without minimizing it, and choose forgiveness, not because the other person deserves it, but because you deserve peace, because you choose not to carry that poison when you lose your job, when your livelihood is taken from you overnight. What can you do? You can't undo the company's decision. You can't force the market to need you, but you can decide how to interpret the event. You can see it as a sentence or as a transition, as the end of something or the beginning of something more. Aligned with who you truly are, you can collapse into despair or use that pain as fuel to reinvent yourself, to discover what you're capable of when everything you relied on disappears. And so every difficult experience, every disappointment, every loss, every rejection becomes a training ground, a gym for the soul. And it's not about romanticizing suffering, but about seeing it with different eyes, about understanding that life is not designed to please you, but to form you. And you decide whether each blow makes you more fragile or more wise. The words of Epictetus then stop being just a nice phrase and become a compass. When something happens to you, whatever it is, the question is never, why me? But what can I do with this? That is the Stoic attitude, not to deny what happens, but neither to surrender to it, to accept it, and then to act with dignity, not from panic, not from rage, from judgment, from that inner space that no one else can touch. That is the greatest revolution, to stop being a victim, to stop waiting for the world to save you, to understand that, although you cannot control everything that happens, you can control your mind, and that is enough, because your mind is the center of your freedom, the place from which you can rebuild everything again and again, no matter how many times it collapses. And so, even in the midst of pain, you can find meaning. Even in the midst of loss, you can find direction. Even in the midst of chaos, you can remain firm, not because you have all the answers, but because you've chosen to live from the only thing that is truly yours, your will, your judgment, your attitude. That is what it means to be wise, not someone invulnerable to emotion, but someone who is trained not to be a slave to it. And if you are master of yourself, as Cicero said, then nothing can truly wound you, because you will have learned the deepest lesson of Stoicism, that strength is not found in dominating the world, but in not letting the world dominate you. Every painful moment is much more than a misfortune. It is a door, a possibility to pass through the surface of the experience and look within yourself, because it's not the pain that defines your destiny, but what you do with it. Every time something shakes you, every time the world hits you, a silent fork in the road appears before you. You can sink into the automatic reaction, rage, complaint, victimhood, resignation, or you can choose to respond differently, with awareness, with character, with virtue. The Stoics were not indifferent to suffering, nor detached from chaos. On the contrary, they wrote from emotional trenches, from loss, from betrayal, from illness, from the collapse of empires. They lived in times as unstable and cruel as ours, and yet, instead of surrendering to pain, they used it as a forge, as a tool, as a test of their inner training. Virtue, that word so forgotten today, so misunderstood, was for them the only true good. Not pleasure, not fame, not success, not security. Virtue, the courage to do what is right, even when it's frightening. Justice, even when it's inconvenient. Temperance, even when everything invites excess. Wisdom, even when ignorance reigns. Virtue not as rigid morality, but as inner strength, as alignment with the best in oneself. Because everything else can disappear, you know it. Your health, even if you take care of it, can fail. Your money, even if you accumulate it, can vanish. Your reputation, even if you protect it, can collapse because of a slander, a rumor, a misunderstanding. None of that is truly in your hands, but your character is. Your attitude, your response, that is your most valuable possession. Your shield when everything burns, your refuge when you're alone, your sword when you have to face what you fear the most. And what's fascinating is that character is built, not inherited. It doesn't depend on temperament or circumstances. It depends on your choices, on what you do with every moment that makes you uncomfortable, that challenges you, that hurts you. That's why the Stoics said that every difficult situation is an opportunity to exercise virtue. Because no one becomes strong by fleeing pain. Strength is born when you choose to face it, to look it in the eyes, and not let it define you. In the coldest prisons, in the longest exiles, on battlefields where life hung by a thread, the Stoics wrote, not because they were insensitive, but because they were more sensitive than most. Because they understood that the soul needs anchors, that in a world where everything changes, where everything trembles, you can only find stability within yourself, in your ability to think clearly, to choose firmly, to act with purpose, even when everything seems to be against you. Because what destroys you is not what happens, it's how you interpret it. A loss can become a lesson. A rejection can reveal your own strength. A betrayal can teach you to let go. A failure can show you the right path. But that only happens if you're willing to change your interpretation, to take control of your mind, and with it, of your life. So today, I invite you to try an experiment. It's not easy, it's radical, but if you do it with honesty, you'll see it can mark a before and after. For just one day, just one, set this intention. Every time something bothers you, irritates you, throws you off, don't react immediately. Stop, breathe, and ask yourself, with complete sincerity, does this depend on me? Don't look for complex answers. Keep it simple. Can I change this with a direct action right now? Is it within my immediate control? If the answer is no, and most of the time it will be, then let it go. Don't waste your energy on the uncontrollable. Don't fight ghosts. Don't crawl through closed doors. Free yourself. But if the answer is yes, if it's in your hands to respond nobly, to correct a mistake, to ask for forgiveness, to speak with clarity, to act with courage, then do it. Act, don't hide. Don't postpone. Be the kind of person who doesn't need to control the world to be strong, who only needs to control their response. This exercise is like a muscle. At first it's uncomfortable. It will hurt because we're conditioned to react automatically, to blame, to complain, to look outside for what can only be resolved within. But if you persevere, if you do it for a day, then a week, then a lifetime, that muscle begins to grow, and with it, you grow, and you'll realize, perhaps for the first time, something essential, that the power you're seeking is not in the circumstances. It's in your judgment, that the peace you long for is not an outer silence, but an inner silence, that the security they promised you is not in accumulating things, but in losing the fear of losing them. When you live like this, with this awareness, with this watchfulness, with this humility, you become another kind of human being, not perfect, but present, not invulnerable, but invincible. Because you'll know, with a certainty that doesn't need words, that nothing can hurt you unless you allow it to. And if any of this resonated with you, don't leave it in words, practice it. Today, you don't need to be an ancient sage, nor a Roman emperor. You only need to remember that your mind is yours, that your freedom lies in how you respond, not in what happens to you. So when the world pushes you, when they provoke you, when life hurts, return to this truth. Nothing can hurt you unless you allow it. Train that freedom. Make it your shield. Your philosophy should not stay in books. It must be lived. And if you want to keep exploring this way of seeing the world, subscribe, because here, every week, We unearth the deepest Stoic teachings and bring them into the present, so you can live like a true philosopher, with courage, with serenity, with virtue. Remember, everything external can be taken away. Accept your choice of how to live, and in that choice lies your power.